back with another end of year video. Today is my stats video, so there will be graphs and things on the screen, and you don't have to just stare at my face. I know my channel could normally just be a podcast. You don't really need to watch it. You just can listen and it'll be fine. But there will be visual aids today if you want to, see them. I also have my notebook, so I may be looking down or, away to get the information here. But I read 42 books this year. I may finish a 43rd, but I didn't count it in this. 27 of those came from the library, which is about 64% of my reading came from the library. 9 of them were books I already owned, so that's about 21% there. And then 2 I had pre-ordered, 2 I had bought used. I went for Mother's Day on a used bookstore kind of haul, and 2 of the books I read this year, and 2 I bought outright, so that's 5% each. I read 22 female authors this year, which is about 52% of my reading, 15 male authors, which is about 36% of my reading. The other 12% were non-binary and or some other category. I think in a couple of cases it was that the book had been written by multiple people and I just kind of put them in a various, instead of trying to suss out, the genders of everybody who contributed or something like that. Last year, 57% of my reading was female and 40% of it was male. So pretty consistent. I felt like I read more male authors this year, but then I realized what it was I was reading fewer female authors and then just kind of assuming that men made up the difference. But no, I read 29% of my reading was diverse in some way, like a minority of some kind. So I'm pretty happy with that. I'm pretty satisfied with that number. 31 of the books I read were hardback. This is probably because most of my books come from the library, and most library books, not all, but most are hardback, library binding. So that's 74% of my reading. 11 of the books I read were paperback, so 26% of those. Last year, 50% of my reading was hardback, 45% was paperback, because last year I did read a couple of ebooks, which made up like 5% of my reading. I don't use an e-reader anymore. I don't miss it, so it no longer really factors for me as a reading format. 32 of the books I read were fiction, 10 were nonfiction, so 76 and 24% respectively there. Last year, it's actually pretty consistent, because last year 77.5% of my reading was fiction and 22.5% was nonfiction. So I did read a little more nonfiction this year. I felt like I was reading a lot more nonfiction, but somehow no, it just felt like it for whatever reason. I read 34 adult books this year, 6 YA and 2 middle grade, so 81%, 14%, and 5%. Last year, 85% of my reading was adult, so I read a little less. I read 7.5% YA last year, so I almost doubled the amount of YA I read this year percentage-wise. And last year I read 7.5% of middle grade. This year it's 5%. I only read 2 middle grade books this year. It's seldom that I'll find a middle grade book that I really want to pick up or revisit, which brings me to like the fact that I did reread 6 books this year, and I DNF'd 2. I DNF'd a lot more than 2, but there are only 2 that I counted as having read enough of them to count towards my reading goal, and then eventually set them aside anyway. So 5% of my reading was DNF, and then what is that? Like 14% were rereads of books that I had read before. Here I will put up the by publishing date. You can see that I still read mostly new and or very recent books. 2024 and 2023 take up a big chunk of this chart, and then even 2022 and the 2010s take up a lot more. So ideally, going forward, I'll try and read more backlist titles. I blame this again on my library. When I walk in, they have these tables and displays with all the new releases, and I typically walk through that first and see things I've heard of or that look interesting and grab them. And because the new releases have a 2-week, checkout window, I don't end up getting more books because I'm like, oh, I gotta read these first and then I can come back for more. And I usually end up being late with it anyway. We don't have library fees at our library, but if you have a book overdue, you can't check out anything else until you return it. So I think that's fair. And so it means that I pick up all these new releases and then I never end up getting back into the stacks. What I want to do is keep an eye on my want to read list, which has some books from, years ago, and hopefully read more of that stuff rather than all the new things. Although, again, on YouTube, newer books tend to also get more views when you're talking about or reviewing them, so some of it is, motivated by that. By the way, I just want to thank the 57 subscribers that joined us this year. YouTube let me know that I have 57 new subscribers this year. We made it past the 200 mark, which, may not seem like a lot compared to most YouTubers, but I'm thankful for every single one of you. So thanks again for joining us here. We'll look at the genres finally. Again, historical and mystery / thriller / suspense. Those are typically my biggest reading categories anyway. Because some books can be more than one category, right? They can be a historical romance and then but I read a lot of historical fiction. I read a lot of mysteries. I put mystery, thriller, suspense together, but I typically read mostly good old-fashioned mysteries. I guess the Riley Sager must have been in the thriller suspense, though. I'm trying to think if I read any thrillers or suspense, and I would say that one probably fell in there. And there were a couple that I probably counted as mystery because there was a mysterious element, like the Haunting on the Hill or whatever that Haunting of Hill House sequel was. I read some fantasy and romance. I read 5 entertainment industry, media industry books, which is unusual, but I think it's because I read the Britney Spears and the Matthew McConaughey and that Toxic book, and so I was reading a lot of stuff like that this year. Biography, memoir. I only read 4 LGBTQ plus books, which surprised me because I typically read a lot of queer stories, particularly if I'm reading historical romance or fantasy or anything like that. So I don't know what happened there, except maybe I just wasn't reading as many of those kinds of books as normal, because I was reading, entertainment media books, I guess. And so it just didn't end up being as big a category for me this year. I read 3 books that had some kind of philosophy angle. Again, that's not typical of me, but I like philosophy, so, I guess I can't be surprised that I read 3 books that had philosophical ideas, and then 3 gothic, ghosty, haunty type books. Again, I typically read, I like haunted house books. I'm always looking for haunted house books, so I guess I can't be surprised that I read 3. I can't decide if I'm surprised I only read 3 or that I read 3. I don't know. I guess 3 might be about average for me. Let me know what your reading looked like this year, if you happen to know or if you keep track of that. Oh, I can show you the Goodreads stuff, which will tell you. Goodreads says that my average rating was 3.6, but that's because Goodreads only allows whole stars. I went ahead and averaged from my spreadsheet because I use decimals sometimes very wonky decimals. Like I'll be like, oh, this was really more like a 3.65 or, you know, whatever. So I came out to 3.5 for my average reading, which seems about right because though I gave some stuff 2 stars, I typically, aside from the 2 I didn't finish, I typically will not keep reading something I'm not enjoying. And so I seldom have anything that's below a 3-star rating, you know, just, you know, unless I'm out to hate read something, I guess. But, yeah, so 3.5, 3.6, that seems like a fair average. I feel like that's generous, but I try not to be too harsh, and I try to remember that not every book is for every person, so I try to think about who would like this book if it wasn't for me, but it might be for you if this, you know, I don't know. As an author, I don't want to yuck anybody's yum and just be like, yeah, it wasn't my thing. These are the issues I had with it. But, you know, you might not. Yeah, that's the thing. Reading is subjective. So yeah. All right. Until next time, I don't know when I'll get around to best worst stuff. But until then, take care.